Hi, welcome back. I'm Shannon Gilmore with Third Eye Nutrition, and today we are going to be talking about one of my favorite ways to flavor food, which is salt. And anyone that knows me well knows that I am unabashed with my salt application to food. And I love all different types and colors, and it's really, really fun to play with salts. And this might surprise a lot of people, I have found. Partially because people, I think, have been told for decades to decrease their salt intake. And I'm definitely not going to start giving out clinical advice today because I have no idea what's happening in your body. But the recent research is changing around that subject. And I would just say a blanket statement in general about salt is that people need to focus less on salt consumption and they need to focus more on decreasing processed foods, which is almost where most of the salt problems come from. Okay. If you are going to farmers markets and you're cooking from scratch, you're shopping on the perimeter of your grocery store, and you're making food from scratch, you basically won't probably have an issue with salt ever, okay? Even if you have a heavy hand with it, okay? With the exception of a couple people that might be genetically predisposed to salt or have like a sensitivity to it, that would be the exception to that. But on a whole, if you're cooking from scratch, salt really shouldn't be much of an issue for most individuals. But today we're going to talk about sort of the best and worst of salt, okay? And I always like to end positive, so we're going to start with the worst. Now, we tend to have table salt. We've known this. I was raised on table salt for decades. They sort of manufacture the salt to sort of have a bunch of, first of all, it's mined from the ground, so let's start with that. But then secondly, these salts tend to have a bunch of things added to it that are really, really unnecessary, with one exception. So oftentimes you're going to see some type of anti-clumping agent in it, which could be aluminum based, it could be calcium silicate, and there's no reason to be putting aluminum in the human body, okay? They also tend to add things like sugar or dextrose to it, which again is unnecessary. And because it's so highly refined, there's absolutely no mineral content to it, okay? So it's a little bit like dead salt. The one redeeming thing about table salt is that they do add iodine to it, and this was happened decades and decades ago by the government to sort of prevent goiter, which is a symptom of hypothyroidism. Okay, so iodine is actually quite important for the human body. You can't make thyroid hormones without it, so it's actually a very, very important element. But there's other ways of getting iodine into your diet without having to use table salt. And so next week I'll be talking about iodine and sources of it so that you have a better idea of, like, you don't need to be doing table salt to get your iodine. Okay, so that's the camp of table salt. And then the other camp is basically all the other salts out there, which are fantastic to some extent. But the other salts tend to be comprised of Himalayan salt and then sea salt, okay? And the difference really is sort of, one is connected to a body of water, so it's sea salt. Sea is a little bit of a misnomer because it could be a sea or a lake base, but it's a water base that the water has just been evaporated. Okay, sea salt tends to always have higher trace minerals than sodium. They tend to have a lower sodium content than table salt. But the thing about all the salts in general is that they tend to have a really wide array of flavors and colors and textures, okay? And this is where it can get really, really fun. So if you can see here, this is like a Hawaiian salt that is like a really gorgeous, lush color. You've got like your black Hawaiian salt, which is awesome. And then you can get really fun, which is you see these huge granules. They're just like these gorgeous, large volcanic salt that all of them have a little bit more of a trace elements than, let's say, your standard table salt, okay? The problem with the sea salts in general, and the thing that I sort of is a big red flag, is, for instance, like a Celtic sea salt. It's a good example. That comes from like the shores of France. And so a lot of these salt origins are connected to some type of body of water. They could be near like a really polluted city in terms of the air, as well as what they're spraying on crops, and that all gets into different, everything's connected. So it's hard to avoid that if it's a highly toxic or polluted environment. But the oceans is really the biggest problem. So if the water beds are next to some type of body of water, unfortunately, because of the carelessness of man, to be quite honest, or humans, these toxins are now in our salt. Okay, I know that's really sad, but it's true. So things that we are seeing now in the salts, particularly the sea salts, is things like heavy metals, mercury, lead. We're seeing petroleum toxins, and we're even seeing things like plastic. We're seeing microplastics into our salt. Okay, so if you're gonna use a sea salt and you really love it, you might want to contact the manufacturer to see if they actually filter out some of these sort of nasty little elements that you really don't want to be eating. Okay, I actually really like this particular product. I'm not a big fan of product promotion, but this is the Redmond Real Salt. It's actually from Utah, which is local, which is great. Local. And what I like about it is this is basically sort of comes from an ancient seabed where there's a volcanic eruption and it basically sealed off sort of this body of water. So it's actually not connected to any ocean, and it is sort of in this own little contained area in a really unpolluted environment. Okay, so this tends to be a pretty pure product. It's what I use for like baking and just sprinkling on things. And you can even see, I don't know if you can see it really closely, but you can see the flecks in there. The flecks are typically trace metals, hopefully, but it can be impurities. So again, check your manufacturer, because those trace metals tend to be a good sign that it's that's a trace element. For instance, these flecks in this product is silica, which is really good for bone health. But check with your manufacturer, because that could also be impurities. Okay. And it's just hard to know with salt in general. So you just need to like get a little cozy up and do some questioning around it. The one thing I should say about all these salts, though, is that they don't have iodine in them. Okay, and that is the big difference between a table salt and all the other salts, is that unless it's added by the manufacturer, it's not going to have iodine. It'll have some, but these are trace amounts, very, very small amounts, not to make a big enough dent to make into changing your thyroid or making thyroid hormones. Okay, so and that goes for all these. That yes, they have a higher trace element content, but they're not massive amounts. Okay, so don't think that this is a source of metals for your body, or minerals, I should say, because it's really there's very, very minute, small amounts. But that's that product, which I kind of like and I use on a regular basis. And then the last one I want to talk about a little bit. So that's a good product. In other words, like if you're going to do a sea salt, you want to make sure that the origin is good with very little pollutants. Okay. The next one, though, and the last one I'm going to show you is Himalayan sea salt, which is probably one of the most popular salts. It comes actually from, you can see it, it comes from Kerala, Pakistan. So it is mined, but it's a pretty pure product. The majority of Himalayan salt, by the way, comes from Pakistan, FYI. It's got this beautiful pink rose color, and that's sort of an increase in iron oxide in it. It does have a lower sodium content. It does not have iodine in it, but it does have a higher content like calcium and iron and magnesium, potassium. So this is a good choice, actually. This is probably one of the best choices to make because it tends to be less polluted. But again, I would still contact your manufacturer to see, because with this day and age, with rampant industrialization, we just don't know what is in things anymore. But I'd say if you had to choose, I'd say something like the Redmond Real Salt would be a good choice. Himalayan salt tends to be a great choice. And then I recently found a product called Premier Pink Salt that actually filters for heavy metals. It has iodine added to it. It is more expensive. But and it's got two different types of salts in it. It has a really pretty pink color to it. So I think it's like a Himalayan / I think Hawaiian lava salt. But I actually might switch to that eventually. Yeah, so hopefully that was helpful, and it'll kind of give you an idea of sort of what you want to be looking for in your salts, because you are consuming this every single day. You're putting on your eggs and your steaks and your hamburgers and your lentils and all this stuff. Like, it's really important that you have a really, really good salt product. And I would say that this is up there with water because it's so frequently used on our day-to-day experiences in terms of quality. Okay, and as always, I'm a big detox fan. I don't want to put toxins in our body, so this is just another source of toxins, and you just be aware of it. Okay, so hopefully it was helpful, and come find me at thirdeyenutrition.com. You can always write with questions at thirdeyenutrition@gmail.com, and I will see you next week. Have a lovely weekend. Ciao.